Marcus Reed was only hired to dust an 8-foot canvas before a Billionaire charity auction, but the second his old sable brush touched the cracked surface, the room went silent. Beneath 30 years of grime, a blue dress appeared. Then a face. Evelyn Whitmore dropped her champagne glass. Her husband staggered back, whispering, "That's Amelia, our daughter." Everyone knew Amelia had vanished decades ago. Victor Hale shouted that Marcus was a fraud, but Marcus saw something hidden under the frame, a message carved into the wood that could destroy the Whitmore empire. The whole room laughed until the dust told a secret money could not bury. Marcus Reed stood beneath the crystal lights of the Whitmore charity auction, holding nothing but his grandmother's old sable brush and a canvas everyone had called worthless. Around him, billionaires whispered behind champagne glasses. Victor Hale smirked, calling him a cleaner, not an artist. Marcus did not answer. He leaned close, studied the cracked surface, and brushed once, slowly, across 30 years of gray dust. A streak of deep blue appeared. The room went still. Evelyn Whitmore's glass slipped from her hand. Richard Whitmore rose from his chair, pale and shaking, because beneath that dust was the face of their missing daughter. 3 days earlier, Marcus Reed had been working in a narrow restoration shop under the elevated train tracks in Baltimore, where every passing car shook dust from the ceiling. His rent was overdue, his phone screen was cracked, and another museum had just rejected his application with polite words that still felt cold. They said he lacked the right background. Marcus knew what they meant. He looked at the old wooden box on his table and opened it with careful hands. Inside lay his grandmother Ruth's sable brush, wrapped in faded cloth. She had taught him patience, dignity, and one rule he never forgot. Never rush dust, Marcus. Dust is where truth hides. That morning, the truth was already on its way. By noon, a black town car stopped outside Marcus's shop, looking almost unreal beside the cracked sidewalk and rusted fire escape. Olivia Whitmore stepped out first, her cream coat spotless, her expression careful but not cruel. Behind her, Victor Hale checked his watch like every second in that neighborhood offended him. Olivia held up a photograph of an old covered painting from her family's storage room. She said the Whitmore auction was in 3 days, and they needed someone discreet, fast, and skilled. Marcus studied the photo, then the strange gray crust along the edge of the frame. Something about it felt wrong. Victor smiled thinly and said, "Just clean it enough to sell." Marcus closed his toolbox and answered, "I need to see it in person." The Whitmore estate sat on 12 acres outside Greenwich, with iron gates, white columns, and lawns trimmed so perfectly they looked painted. Marcus stepped from the town car carrying one toolbox, his shoes quiet against the marble floor. Chandeliers glowed above him, but the house felt colder than his shop. Family portraits lined the hallway, all gold frames and serious eyes. Olivia walked beside him, trying to explain the auction, while Victor stayed half a step behind, already impatient. At the end of a storage room, Marcus saw the covered canvas leaning near crates of silver and old catalogs. Victor waved toward it and said, "The cleaner can work here." Marcus looked at the dusty shape and felt his grandmother's brush shift in his coat pocket. Marcus pulled back the cloth, and the smell reached him first, not old wood, not simple dust, but salt, oil, and something sharp beneath it. He crouched closer, barely breathing. The surface was not just dirty. It had been buried under careless hands, bad storage, and years of silence. Victor stepped forward with a bottle of strong cleaner and said the photographers were arriving by morning. "One wipe," he said. "Make it presentable." Marcus did not touch the bottle. "If I use that, the layer underneath dies," he said. Victor's smile vanished. Olivia looked from the bottle to Marcus's steady hands. For the first time, she realized he was not protecting a job. He was protecting a secret. By evening, the storage room had become a stage. Caterers passed trays through the hall, donors arrived in black suits and satin gowns, and the covered painting was moved near the auction display. Marcus stood beside it with his toolbox, while people looked at him like he belonged in the service entrance. One silver-haired collector tilted his head and asked, "Where did you study restoration, YouTube?" A few guests laughed softly. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I learned from a woman whose name was stolen by rooms like this." Olivia turned toward him, surprised by the pain under those words. Victor's eyes narrowed. because Marcus had just said too much. Victor stepped between Marcus and the painting, his smile sharp enough to cut the air. "This is a charity auction, not a family therapy session," he said. But Richard Whitmore, who had been quiet all evening, lifted one hand. "Let him work." Marcus opened the wooden box and took out Ruth's brush. The chatter faded. Even the pianist stopped between notes. He leaned in and touched the gray surface with the patience of a man listening for breath. One slow stroke, then another. Dust curled away like old smoke. A strip of blue appeared, deep as a summer sky. Evelyn Whitmore stepped closer, her lips trembling. Marcus brushed again, and the edge of a woman's face emerged. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands as the face became clearer, soft brown hair, a blue dress, and the same small scar near the left eyebrow Olivia had seen only in old family photographs. Richard moved forward like the floor had tilted beneath him. "Amelia," he whispered, and the name broke something in the room. No one laughed now. No one reached for champagne. Marcus lowered the brush, his own hand unsteady, because the woman in the painting looked alive beneath the dust. Olivia stared at her parents, suddenly understanding why their mansion had always felt full of locked doors. Then Victor's voice cut through the silence. "This proves nothing. This man could have planned all of it." Victor raised his hand, and two security guards moved toward Marcus as if he had walked in carrying a crime instead of a brush. "Hand over the tools," Victor said. "We will let real experts examine this." Marcus closed the wooden box slowly, but his eyes stayed on the frame. There was something wrong with the bottom edge, a thin line where the wood had swollen, then been sealed again. Olivia noticed him staring. "What do you see?" she asked. Victor snapped, "Olivia, do not encourage this." The whole room watched her choose. For 20 years, she had obeyed the silence in that house. Not tonight. She stepped beside Marcus and said, "Nobody touches his tools until he tells us what is hidden there." Marcus did not argue with Victor. He only asked Olivia for a clean table, a soft lamp, and 10 quiet minutes. She led him and her parents into the old family library, where dust floated above leather chairs and locked cabinets. With careful pressure, Marcus studied the bottom of the frame. The seal was newer than the wood, maybe 20 years newer. Richard searched the archives with shaking hands, pulling old inventory books from a shelf. Then Olivia found a thin file marked Restoration Incident, 1994. Inside was one name that made Marcus stop breathing. Ruth Reed. His grandmother had once worked for the Whitmores, and according to the file, she had been accused of stealing a painting that never truly left the house. Marcus felt the room tilt, but Ruth's voice came back to him as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "Never rush dust. Dust is where truth hides." He lifted the frame under the lamp and found a narrow groove sealed with old wax. Olivia handed him a small restoration blade, and Marcus worked slowly until the wood released a folded envelope, yellowed but dry. Richard reached for Evelyn's hand. On the front was Amelia's handwriting. "Mom and Dad, if you find this, I did not leave because I stopped loving you." Olivia's breath caught. Marcus unfolded the letter, and one sentence made Victor go pale before anyone even spoke his name. The sentence read, "Victor Hale's father has been moving money through the Art Foundation, and Ruth Reed is the only person brave enough to help me prove it." Silence filled the library so completely that even the music from the ballroom seemed far away. Victor backed toward the door, but Olivia was already holding the file, the letter, and the restored corner of the portrait like pieces of one broken truth. Minutes later, she returned to the gala and stepped onto the stage. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "My family owes an apology to Amelia Whitmore, to Ruth Reed, and to Marcus Reed." Richard lowered his head in shame. Evelyn wept openly. Victor's perfect smile disappeared. Months later, the Whitmore Galleries opened a new wing named the Ruth Reed Restoration Hall. The portrait of Amelia stood at the center, cleaned with patience, not power, and beside it rested Ruth's old sable brush in a glass case. Marcus stood quietly at the back, still feeling like the boy his grandmother had taught under a kitchen light. Then Evelyn Whitmore walked to him, took his hands, and said, "You did not restore a painting. You brought our daughter home and gave Ruth her name back." Richard announced a permanent scholarship for overlooked restorers across America. Olivia looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes, and for the first time, he knew some doors opened only after truth knocked hard enough.